I have a question for you. Have you started forgetting things you normally wouldn't forget? Are little things making you more irritated than they used to? Are you exhausted even after you slept? You might tell yourself you're stressed. You might even tell yourself it's simply part of taking care of someone you love. But these might be caregiver burnout symptoms. One of the 7 warning signs we're going to talk about surprised me because most people wouldn't immediately connect it with caregiver burnout. So as we go through these, please keep track of how many sound familiar to you. Hi, I'm Richard, the founder of CareNestHQ. We help families coordinate care when someone they love needs support. And if you're caring for your parent, your spouse, or another family member, there's something I want you to remember. Caregiver burnout usually doesn't arrive all at once. It builds. And because you're focused on taking care of the person you love, you might miss what's happening to you. Here are 7 caregiver burnout symptoms worth paying attention to. Number 1, you're exhausted all the time. Let's start with the obvious one. You're tired. But I'm not talking about having a long day and wanting to go to bed early. I'm talking about feeling drained before the day even starts. You might wake up tired, you go through the day tired, you go to bed tired, and even when you get some rest, and you don't feel restored. Think about everything your brain might be tracking. Did mom take her medicine? Who's taking dad to the appointment? Did anyone call the insurance company? Who's bringing dinner? Did I respond to my sister? Did the doctor say? You might not physically be caregiving every minute, but mentally you're still on duty. That's different from ordinary tiredness. So, number 2, you're becoming more irritable. Here's another warning sign. Things normally wouldn't bother you suddenly are bothering you a lot. Someone asks you a simple question and you snap at them. Your sibling doesn't respond to a text and you're just furious. Your parent asks you something for a 3rd time and you just lose your patience. Then something else happens. You feel guilty about getting frustrated. So now you're exhausted, irritated, and guilty. If you notice your patience is getting shorter and shorter, pay attention. Your emotional reserve might be running low. And number 3, you start withdrawing from people. This one happens quietly. Someone asks you, want to go to dinner? You say no. A friend calls, you don't answer. You stop, doing the things that you used to enjoy. So at first, there's a practical reason. You don't have time, but eventually caregiving starts to take over more and more and more of your life. The isolation makes you feel already, an already difficult situation harder. So ask yourself a simple question. When was the last time you did something you enjoyed that had nothing to do with caregiving? If you have trouble answering, pay attention, please. Number 4, you're feeling like you're never doing enough. This is caregiver guilt, straight and simple. And I think this is one of the hardest parts of family caregiving. You help with appointments, you make phone calls, you coordinate medication, you handle groceries, you check in, you solve problems, and somehow you still think, should I be doing more? Maybe you feel guilty because you went out to dinner. Maybe you feel guilty because you're frustrated. Maybe you feel guilty because part of you wants a break. That's normal. You could even give someone everything and still convince yourself you haven't given enough. Guilt isn't a measurement of how good a caregiver you are, and constantly feeling like you're failing is something you need to recognize. Number 5, your own health starts slipping. Now pay attention, please, to your own routines. Are you skipping meals, eating differently, sleeping poorly, skipping exercise, canceling on your own appointments, getting headaches more often than normal? When you're responsible for someone else's health, your health often moves to the bottom of the list. And we've all done this. You tell yourself, I'll deal with myself later. But later keeps getting pushed back. You matter in this equation too. Number 6, you feel like you're doing this alone. You don't have physically be alone, but feel alone. You might have brothers and sisters. You might have a spouse. You might have friends who care, but you still are the person everyone calls. You're keeping track of everything. You're coordinating appointments. You're following up. You're remembering what needs to happen next. This is something families often underestimate. Caregiving isn't only the task you perform, there's also mental work of coordinating everything. And when one person owns most of the invisible work, that load gets heavy quickly. So number 7, our last one, your brain starts feeling different. Here's the symptoms I mentioned at the beginning. Brain fog. You walk into a room and you forget why you're there. You lose your keys. You forget an appointment. You read something and realize, I didn't absorb that, any of it. You have trouble concentrating on work. And you start thinking, what is wrong with me? Sometimes the issue isn't that you suddenly become forgetful. You're carrying too much. And when your brain is constantly tracking responsibilities and decisions and worries, and concentration gets harder and harder and harder. If you've been experiencing brain fog along with several of these other caregiver burnout symptoms, we've discussed, don't brush it aside. So how many of those 7 sounded familiar? 1, 3, maybe 5? The goal isn't to give yourself another thing to worry about. The goal is to recognize when your current system isn't sustainable. Start by looking at what you're carrying. Write down everything you're responsible for. The appointments, the meals, the transportation, the medical reminders, the family updates, the shopping, the phone calls. Whatever you're managing, then ask, what does someone else need to own? Not help with. I'm talking own. Maybe your brother handles transportation. Maybe your sister owns appointments. Maybe a neighbor brings dinner once a week. Maybe someone else handles family updates. Because one of the best ways to reduce caregiver burnout is to stop making one person the operating system for the entire family. So if you recognize some of these caregiver burnout symptoms in yourself, don't ignore them, please. You don't have to solve everything today. Just start by taking one responsibility off your plate. And if you're dealing with aging parents or coordinating care with your family, follow CareNestHQ. I'm sharing practical ways to make caregiving more organized, less confusing, and easier for families to manage together.